Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for being here. My name is Derek Goldman. I'm chair of the Department of Performing Arts at Georgetown and director of the Theater and Performance Studies program. And I'm also co-director with my colleague, Ambassador Cynthia Schneider, of the Laboratory for Global Performance and Politics, a joint initiative of the School of Foreign Service and the college with the mission of harnessing the power of performance to humanize global politics. I want to extend a huge thank you to our partners on this event. It's been an incredible collaborative effort, a cross-disciplinary effort. First and foremost, the Georgetown Medical Humanities Initiative, led by its director and my extraordinary colleague and collaborator in co-curating this program, Dr. Lakshmi Krishnan, whom you'll meet in a moment, along with the Georgetown Humanities Initiative, the LGBTQ Center, the Georgetown University School of Medicine, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion in Literature and Medicine track. The idea for today's event was hatched in conversation with Lakshmi, with whom I've been privileged to work over the past year as part of the Medical Humanities Initiative. We realized as this unusual and challenging semester was beginning that both of us were about to teach new interdisciplinary courses on the pandemic, mine entitled Performance and Pandemic, in which we're engaging the pandemic through the lens of the artistic, spiritual, economic, and public health implications for the performing arts, and hers from the perspective of the medical humanities. And we both plan to teach Tony Kushner's play, Angels in America, and we each were finding that despite long and deep histories with this play, that it had new and startlingly particular resonance in this moment. As I shared with Lakshmi and with my students this semester, my own undergraduate experience as a performance studies student at Northwestern University was in many ways centered around the many friends and young members of our community who were dying, along with an onslaught of intense personal and familial losses. Simultaneously, the experience of art making and activism inspired by the AIDS epidemic, even well before the 1993 premiere of Angels in America on Broadway, laid the foundation for almost everything meaningful I have done ever since. In a sense, to invoke the play, for so many, the work began. Like all classics, Angels keeps changing and deepening as it reflects and refracts the realities of a new time. Most of these actors who you'll see today have performed in professional productions of the play over the years, including 3 who were in the memorable 2016 co-production between the Olney Theater and Roundhouse Theater, directed by Jason Lowith and Ryan Roulette. And yet when we gathered to read the scenes last week, we were startled and quite emotional about just how current the work felt, fresh and raw in new ways. The play is so deeply concerned with prophecy, and yet encountering it in this exact moment, a week before November 3rd, it itself feels prophetic. I want to welcome in Lakshmi Krishnan, my colleague from the Medical Humanities Initiative, to meet you all.
Thank you so much, Derek, for that extraordinary introduction. It's been an honor to work with you on this. And as Derek said, my name is Lakshmi Krishnan. I'm a physician and historian of medicine and direct the Georgetown Medical Humanities Initiative. And I'd like to echo Derek's welcome and once again extend heartfelt thanks to our partners, including Professor Nicoleta Piredu, the director of the Georgetown Humanities Initiative, Dr. Daniel Marshalik, the director of the Literature and Medicine track at the School of Medicine, and Shiva Subbaraman, the executive director of the LGBTQ Center. We've all come to this work from a range of perspectives and relationships to the play, but the work itself has been a process of discovery, I think, for all of us, surprising and poignant. In 1981, 10 years before the first performance of Angels in America, the Centers for Disease Control published a report of 5 cases of rare pneumonia among healthy young men in Los Angeles. Laced throughout that report are words that have once again assumed signal importance in our time: antibodies, detection, immune dysfunction, steroids, and unknown disease. but the human impact of that time does not appear in a case report. And on our panel are experts, but more than that, people who lived through those years, who mobilized in the early days of HIV as scientists, organizers, artists, and activists. And sharing the stage with them are those who've taken up that mantle, who through performance, language, service, and scholarship are shifting our world into a more just and equitable place. So today, as we face a different pandemic amidst a wave of global challenges, we hope that this bridge from 1981 to 2020 will lead us not only to revisit, but to reimagine, to remake. In his introduction to Angels, Tony Kushner describes that time as galvanizing, terrifying, but galvanizing. And may the same be said of our own. With that, it's my honor, absolute honor, to introduce our panelists and to ask them to introduce themselves, their work, and their relationship with Angels in America. The Honorable Mark Dybul is the co-director of the Center for Global Health Practice and Impact and professor in the Department of Medicine at Georgetown University Medical Center. Dr. Delia Wesley is the Scientific Director for Health Equity Research in the Healthcare Delivery Research Network at MedStar Health Research Institute and faculty at the Georgetown University School of Medicine. Dr. Leon Lai is the Program Director of the Ryan White AIDS Early Intervention Program and attending physician in the MedStar section of infectious diseases. And Bassam Siddiqui is a graduate of Georgetown College and currently a PhD candidate in English at the University of Michigan, where he studies the literary and cultural history of Anglophone imperial tropical medicine. Thank you, and I'll invite our panelists now.
Hi, thanks Lakshmi, and thank you, Derek, for introducing this session. My name is Mark Dybul, as Lakshmi said. I won't give you my current titles because she did. I was an undergrad at Georgetown in the 80s, studying philosophy, theology, and poetry, and trying to decide which of those to get a doctoral degree in when I learned about HIV/AIDS, and was going through my own coming out experience as a gay man, and decided to switch from the humanities to medicine to be involved with HIV/AIDS. I was an activist, like almost all of us were, but decided that I should try to do more. And so went to medical school with no pre-med classes, which was a lot of fun. And then was very fortunate to go to the National Institutes of Health and study under Tony Fauci, run a section of his lab. He's my mentor and friend now for a long time. We began work in Africa, which was my passion then. Difficult to describe what it was like in Africa, having lived in San Francisco and done my 4th year of medicine at the University of California, San Francisco. What was happening on the continent of Africa is almost beyond comprehension in 2000 or so. We were doing work there to try to bring antiretroviral therapy to people in Africa when President Bush decided to invest heavily in the US President's emergency plan for AIDS relief. Tony and I were involved in creating that with 8 people, and then they dragged me down and had me run it for a bit. And then I went on to run the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria. Been very involved in pandemics now for a long time, and now very active in COVID. I've never seen Angels in America. I've never really read or seen most things about HIV. To be honest, I've always found them a little bit too difficult, and felt like I lived them every day, and didn't want to do that in my spare time, in a sense. So it'll be a new experience for me to hear it because I've never seen it.
So this is, I think I'm up next. My name is, thank you for the introduction, Delia Wesley. I'm the Scientific Director of Health Equity Research at the MedStar Health Research Institute. I'm also the founding Scientific Director for the Center for Health Equity Research. And as Lakshmi mentioned, I'm also an assistant professor at the Georgetown University School of Medicine under the Biomedical Scholar Track. I, in my current role, work with various clinical teams across MedStar to try to understand the root causes and drivers of the disparities we see across clinical conditions. My training and expertise are in health disparities, focusing really heavily on patient level factors that impact communication and influence health decision making, cultural context and other contextual factors that impact us, how especially racial and ethnic minorities access and utilize health services. And really trying to understand how marginalized populations in particular interact with the healthcare system and the influence on health outcomes, ideally. And then the goal really being to be able to address these and achieve more equitable care. Having worked in disparities research for over 12, 15 years now, and seeing many of the same patterns play out in our current pandemic as we've been seeing in this field for years, if not decades. As a health equity researcher, it's weird to be excited at this time, but excited because I feel like in a space where we're able to galvanize around these efforts and really achieve equity that is so much needed, and how that has been rooted in much of the same historic injustices. And so as a student, my actual prior interaction with Angels was only as a student, where I minored in English major and English literature. And it was the one play or one work that actually married the two areas of passion and interest for me. And so I'm really excited to see it come to life, and really honored to be a part of this discussion.
So I'd like to thank Derek and Lakshmi for inviting me to take part in this. I'm a physician at MedStar Washington Hospital Center in infectious diseases. And as a young man like Mark, came out and, took part in some of the protests early on with AIDS activism and ACT UP. And then made the decision to really go into medicine with the idea of practicing HIV care. So I've been doing HIV clinical medicine for quite a long time now, and have seen different parts of the epidemic and sort of transition from the time when we really didn't have any therapy to when we have some really very good therapies for HIV. And at MedStar Washington Hospital Center, I am the program director for the Ryan White Services Program, which is a grant that's provided by the federal government that allows us to employ social workers, treatment navigators, nurse practitioners, and funds and supplements to our patients with HIV to allow them to have assistance in navigating the healthcare system and get the care that they need. Our clinic is primarily African-American, 50% women. So over the course of the past 15 years, I've become acutely aware of the discrepancies in care in underrepresented minorities through my work in this area. And it's really sort of come to light now because as an infectious disease physician, just like Mark, we're now taking care of a lot of patients with COVID-19. And we do see how the disparities in care affect who gets the disease and how they get treated and how they do. And their outcomes, and there's a big difference. And how unfair, unfortunate that is. My relationship with Angels of America started, we saw the original production when it first came out. We were lucky enough to see that, and one day after the other. It's a long play. And then we saw the revival, and then again, we saw the HBO movie, and so we've loved every production of it. I've read the play in its book form, so I'm quite familiar with it, and it's just pretty amazing work.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Lakshmi and Derek, for inviting me to be on this very, very exciting panel. As Lakshmi said, my name is Bassam. I am a graduate of Georgetown College. I graduated in 2016. I majored in English, and my thesis was actually on medical humanities and William Carlos Williams. And then the next year in 2017, I received my MA in medical humanities from Northwestern University. And currently I'm at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. I'm a fourth year PhD candidate in English. And my dissertation engages with the intersections of imperialism and colonialism, tropical medicine, and disability studies. So being a Pakistani immigrant, so I only came to this country in 2010. And so my exposure to American letters was limited. So my first exposure to the play was actually the HBO version, which I really loved. And then here at Michigan, I actually teach a specialized English composition course for health humanities scholars. And so we have usually a visual component. And so I chose the HBO film to teach, and the students really loved it. And especially the political moment that we're living in, for them, it was really sort of mind blowing to kind of see the connections with the current administration as they will become clear in due course. But thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you all. And so what we're going to do, we've concocted a bit of a 3-act structure approach for this to weave between kind of commentary and discussion with this extraordinary group of panelists and scenes from the play, excerpts for which we have 5 of the most extraordinary actors that I know. Mitchell Hebert, who plays Roy Cohn, and GU faculty member Sarah Marshall, who plays Henry, Tom Story, who plays Prior Walter, Alexander Strain, who plays Lewis, and Justin Weeks, who plays Belize. If you know the play, you know that it is kaleidoscopic and wildly expansive in its exploration of the political and religious, sexual, medical, and the legal, as well as the cosmological, the supernatural, and the metaphysical, the presence of dreams, hallucinations, angels, ghosts. If you aren't familiar with the play, we will be hard-pressed in our time to give you comprehensive plot summaries. But what we've done is we've chosen scenes that we feel like will allow an audience, even if you don't know the play, to drop in and make connections, both emotionally and intellectually, to this present moment. So the first selection of scenes that we'll hear deals with what we are calling the medical and the personal, as we encounter 2 very different characters dealing with the reality of their diagnosis and the onset of symptoms. We begin in Act 1, Scene 8 of Millennium Approaches, which is the first of the play's 2 parts. Prior Walter, the last member of a long-loved WASP family, has been recently diagnosed with AIDS, and his Jewish lover, Louis Ironson, is struggling to cope with the news. And then in the very next scene, which we'll transition right into, we see Roy Cohn, the character, the lawyer prosecutor, best known for being Joseph McCarthy's chief counsel and assisting with his investigation of communists, as well as the one-time lawyer to and mentor of Donald Trump, receiving the news from his doctor that he has AIDS. And after that scene, we return back to Lewis and Prior for a short section, a kind of coda at the end of Act 1, Scene 8 that we felt was especially timely in the current moment. So I hand it off to these beautiful actors.
Jews don't have any clear textual guide to the afterlife, even that it exists. I don't think much about it. I see it as a perpetual rainy Thursday afternoon in March. Dead leaves.
Ew, very Greco-Roman.
Well, for us, it's not the verdict that counts. It's the act of judgment. That's why I could never be a lawyer. In court, all that matters is the verdict.
You could never be a lawyer because you are oversexed. You're too distracted.
Not distracted, abstracted. I'm trying to make a point.
Namely?
It's the judge in his or her chamber, weighing, books open, pondering the evidence, ranging freely over categories: good, evil, innocent, guilty. The judge in the chamber of circumspection, not the judge on the bench with the gavel, the shaping of the law, not its execution.
Point, dear, the point.
That it should be the questions and shape of a life, its total complexity, gathered, arranged, and considered, which matters in the end. Not some stamp of salvation or damnation, which disperses all the complexity in some unsatisfying little decision. The balancing of the scales.
I like this. It's very Zen. It's reassuringly incomprehensible and useless. We who are about to die, thank you.
You are not about to die.
It's not going well. Really. 2 new lesions. My leg hurts. There's protein in my urine, the doctor says, but who the fuck knows what that portends? Anyway, it shouldn't be there, the protein. My butt is chapped from diarrhea, and yesterday I shat blood.
I really hate this. You don't tell me.
You get too upset. I wind up comforting you. It's easier.
Oh, thanks.
If it's bad, I'll tell you.
Well, shitting blood sounds bad to me.
And I'm telling you.
And I'm handling it.
Tell me some more about justice.
I am handling it.
Well, Lewis, you win Trooper of the Month. I take it back. You aren't Trooper of the Month. This isn't working. Tell me some more about justice.
You are not about to die.
Justice
is an immensity, confusing vastness. Justice is God. Prior.
Hmm?
You love me.
Yes.
What if I walked out on this? Would you hate me forever?
Yes.
Nobody knows what causes it, and nobody knows how to cure it. The best theory is that we blame a retrovirus, the human immunodeficiency virus. Its presence is made known to us by the useless antibodies which appear in reaction to its entrance into the bloodstream through a cut or an orifice. The antibodies are powerless to protect the body against it. Why? We don't know. The body's immune system ceases to function, and sometimes the body even attacks itself. At any rate, it's left open to a whole horror house of infections from microbes which it usually defends against, like Kaposi's sarcomas, these lesions, or your throat problem, or the glands. We think it may also be able to slip past the blood-brain barrier into the brain, which is, of course, very bad news. And it is fatal in what we don't know what % of people with suppressed immune responses.
Well, this is very interesting, Mr. Wizard, but why the fuck are you telling me this?
Well, I have just removed one of 3 lesions, which biopsy results will probably tell us is a Kaposi's sarcoma lesion. And you have a pronounced swelling of glands in your neck, groin, and armpits. Lymphadenopathy is another sign. And you have oral candidiasis and maybe a little more fungus under the fingernails of 2 digits on your right hand. So that's why.
This disease.
Syndrome.
Whatever. It afflicts mostly homosexuals and drug addicts.
Mostly, but hemophiliacs are also at risk.
Homosexuals and drug addicts. So why are you implying that I... What are you implying, Henry?
I don't...
I'm not a drug addict?
Oh, come on, Roy.
Well, come on, Roy, what? But do you think that I'm a junkie, Henry? Do you see tracks?
This is absurd.
Well, say it.
Say what?
Say, Roy Cohn, you are a...
But, Roy, I don't...
You are a... Go Not Roy Cohn. You are a drug fiend. No. Roy Marcus Cohn, you are a. Go on, Henry. Starts with an H.
Oh, I'm not going to.
With an H, Henry, and it isn't hemophiliac. Come on.
What are you doing, Roy?
No, say it. I mean it. Say, Roy Cohn, you are a homosexual. And I will proceed systematically to destroy your reputation and your practice and your career in New York State, which you know I can do.
Roy, you have been seeing me since 1958. Apart from the facelifts, I have treated you for everything from syphilis.
From a whore in Dallas.
From syphilis to venereal warts in your rectum, which you may have gotten from a whore in Dallas, but it wasn't a female whore.
So say it.
Roy Cohn, you have had sex with men many, many times, Roy, and one of them, or any number of them, has made you very sick. You have AIDS.
AIDS. Your problem, Henry, is that you're hung up on words, on labels, that you believe they mean what they seem to mean. AIDS, homosexual, gay, lesbian. You think these are names that tell you who someone sleeps with, but they don't tell you that.
No?
No. No, like all labels, they tell you one thing and they tell you one thing only. Where does an individual so identified fit in the food chain, in the pecking order? Not ideology or sexual taste, but something much simpler. Clout. Not who I fuck or who fucks me, but who will pick up the phone when I call? Who owes me favors? This is what a label refers to. Now, to someone who does not understand this, homosexual is what I am because I have sex with men. But really, this is wrong. Homosexuals are not men who sleep with other men. Homosexuals are men who in 15 years of trying cannot pass a pissant anti-discrimination bill through city council. Homosexuals are men who know nobody and nobody knows, who have zero clout. Now, does that sound like me, Henry?
No.
No, I have clout. A lot. I could pick up this phone, I could punch in 15 numbers. And you know who will be on the other end in under 5 minutes, Henry?
The president.
Even better, Henry. His wife.
I'm impressed.
Oh, I don't want you to be impressed. I want you to understand. This is not sophistry. This is not hypocrisy. This is reality. I have sex with men. But unlike every other man of whom this is true, I bring the guy that I'm screwing to the White House, and President Reagan smiles at us. And he shakes his hand because what I am is defined entirely by who I am. Roy Cohn is not a homosexual. Roy Cohn is a heterosexual man, Henry, who fucks around with guys.
Okay, Roy.
What is my diagnosis, Henry?
You have AIDS, Roy.
No, Henry. No. AIDS is what homosexuals have. I have liver cancer.
Well, whatever the fuck you have, Roy, it's very serious, and I don't have a damn thing for you. The NIH in Bethesda has a new drug called AZT with a 2-year waiting list that not even I can get you onto. So get on the phone, Roy, and dial the 15 numbers and tell the first lady you need in on an experimental treatment for liver cancer, because you can call it any damn thing you want, Roy. But what it boils down to is very bad news.
One of my ancestors was a ship's captain who made money bringing whale oil to Europe and returning with immigrants. Irish mostly, packed in tight, so many dollars per head. The last ship he captained foundered off the coast of Nova Scotia in a winter tempest and sank to the bottom. He went down with the ship, the grand jest. But his crew took 70 women and kids in the ship's only longboat, this big open rowboat. And when the weather got too rough and they thought the boat was overcrowded, the crew started lifting people up and hurling them into the sea until they got the ballast right. They walked up and down the longboat, eyes to the waterline, and when the boat rode low in the water, they would grab the nearest passenger and just throw them into the sea. The boat was leaky. 70 people. They arrived in Halifax with 9 people aboard.
Jesus.
I think about that story a lot now. People in a boat, waiting, terrified, while implacable, unsmiling men, irresistibly strong seas, maybe the person next to you, maybe you, and with no warning at all, with time only for a quick intake of air, you are pitched into freezing, turbulent water and salt and darkness to drown. I like your cosmology, baby. While time is running out, I find myself drawn to anything that's suspended, that lacks an ending. But it seems to me that it lets you off scot-free.
What do you mean?
No judgment, no guilt, or responsibility.
For me.
For anyone. It was an editorial you.
Please get better. Please don't get any sicker.
So I would now like to invite our distinguished welcome back, panelists. I would like to now invite each of you to share immediate thoughts that went through your mind when you looked at these, when you heard and looked at these scenes. What resonated?
I can happy to get us started. So, really powerful scenes for so many reasons. And it's been a while since I read the play, but in just hearing the dialogue, it's really hard for me not to hearken directly back to the early days of the current pandemic that we are in the midst of, where people were trying to sort of note patterns and figure out who was being infected and what was going on. And I distinctly recall, and what these lines reminded me of is right in the early days of the pandemic, it was you know, a lot of chatter around, oh, it's only older white males who are getting getting, you know, coronavirus. And then it was, oh, it's only older people. And then it was, well, it's only older white males. And so the way that those conversations changed and nobody really wanting to own it, to quote unquote own it, followed by that moment of diagnosis when we first started to see the true patterns emerge, and that realization that, oh, wait, it's actually overwhelmingly Black and brown people getting it. And then, well, only if they're Black and brown and obese or with some underlying condition, you know, and sort of how that, again, it's sort of like the passing the hot potato of what it is and who gets it. And then it really became clear that, in fact, it's actually the exact same underlying, you know, issues. And I'm brought back to just that overwhelming feeling of sort of dread and despair and vulnerability that that I think was palpable as it began to wash over our communities, and specifically when it was so clearly related to that vulnerability and health status that seemed to make certain people more at risk. And so seeing that play out and understanding that the vulnerability wasn't really equally distributed and starting to see those patterns with the current pandemic really resonated with me. And I think even more so when we saw that the infections were concentrating more in areas where there were higher social needs or, you know, other non-clinical determinants, and that realization that once again, all of what we're seeing in hospitalizations and deaths were really a symptomatic of symptom of something that was more systemic, some inequities that lay further upstream. And I think, again, it was resonating that there was really sort of this underlying kind of social policies or discrimination or some otherness that in many ways was the true pandemic. So that's a lot of what I was reacting to seeing these things.
Thank you, Delia.
Yeah, so the thing, I agree with everything that Delia said. I think one of the things that sort of struck me was that last scene with Prior and his sort of sense of existential dread and sort of uncertainty and not knowing what's been going on. I think today, everybody, you can see all these memes and posts and tweets about how 2020 has been the worst year ever. I think it's important to think about for certain communities that were really affected by HIV and AIDS, 80s and early 90s, how that sense of existential dread is a good 10, 15 years, right? That wasn't, you lived with that. It wasn't a year, it wasn't 2 years. I think the other thing that struck me was the character of Roy Cohn. Not to get too political, but that just really brought to mind that struggle between politics and science, right? That politics sort of, which is about the politics of power, which is about people who can exert influence over others unwanted, who can control other people, who try to control other people through money, through force, through violence, okay? And then how that meets that sort of unyielding fact of science and medicine and that conflict there, and the kind of people who wield that power. So that really sort of, I think the actress did a wonderful job and sort of brought that home. Yeah.
Thank you, Leon.
But first of all, thank you to the actors for phenomenal performances. And a lot of what, in fact, all of what Delia and Leon have said have resonated with me. I just pick up on one thing that Delia said and expanded a little bit on what we call the structural factors. While unlike HIV, everyone gets infected with COVID, it's just who dies from it, who gets sick and dies from it, which is very different than HIV. Where you can differentiate those structural factors into who gets infected still today, and I want to come back to that. But I think we use these terms, antiseptic terms like structural factors. I wonder what, Angels in America would have said about that. It's just code for racism, sexism, homophobism, and because of that, not only health issues, but fundamental rights, economic access, health access, and that's why people get sick and die. There might be some genetic component, but we should be, I think we should, take a page from this and not allow ourselves to fall into euphemisms like structural factors and call it for what it is. And maybe that's something we could work on in this pandemic, but also keep in mind what's happening with the current pandemic, going back to the lines, I am not a homosexual and I have liver cancer. For a lot of African-American men in particular in the South today, they would say exactly the same thing. Many are bisexuals because they have to be. And that's why we have an out of control epidemic in the South in the United States, especially among Black men and Latino men who are actually gay, but have sex with women too because they have to for cultural and sexual reasons, and women get infected because of men who have to have sex with them. And why do we still in this country today have people dying from HIV when we have antiretroviral therapy? Why do we still have infection rates that are higher in many counties in the United States than many places in Africa today among Black men? Some even say maybe up to 50% again of Black men are at risk and could be infected with HIV in these 47, 52 counties. It's racist. They're doubly stigmatized by race and by being gay in this country today. That's not a structural factor. That is a horrific human factor. And if you look in Africa, you see very similar things. Men who are not able to be themselves. It's a very, very heterosexual epidemic in Africa. But the reason for that is because women have no rights either. The women's birth is not registered in many countries in Africa, because why would you register the birth of a woman? Sex abuse and gender inequality drives these factors. So people hide from these terms because of the discrimination that goes on, like I am not gay, I don't have HIV, I have liver cancer. This still is happening in countries today and is still happening in the United States today in 52 counties. So I think this is poignant not only because of COVID, it's very poignant because of HIV and the ongoing epidemic of HIV that is hidden from sight because of who continues to be infected.
Thank you so much. I really want to pick up on the thread of power, which I recognized in each of what you have said, and how that power necessarily influences who gets to be immune from a certain term. And I'm using the term immune here in both of its senses, right? So kind of sort of looking back at the scene and looking and thinking about the Cohn and the Trump connection. Just a few days ago, Trump was in the headlines again saying that he is now immune from COVID, right? And over here, we see Roy Cohn, this fictional Roy Cohn, sort of saying that I am immune from labels, right? And he doesn't have AIDS, he has liver cancer. So kind of the way that the power shapes who gets to identify as something or not is really, really poignant here. And also what's really, really interesting is that during this conversation between Roy Cohn and his doctor, the 3 H's are mentioned, but not the 4th one, right? So there is this very interesting erasure here of racial disparities, which will, when we go into the next section, will be addressed. But in the AIDS crisis, you had the homosexual, you had the hemophiliac, you had the heroin user. And the 4th one, because of America and its racist binary system, the 4th people were Haitians, right? That they painted as reservoirs of HIV and AIDS. So there is this really interesting way in which the play is kind of enacting a kind of erasure, right? But then also inviting the viewer or the reader to fill in that gap. So we have 2 more minutes. So any last observations before we move on to the next section?
Not everybody can get Regeneron, right? Can go and get some drug that's not been approved yet, number 1. Number 2, when you are struggling because you haven't been able to get a job, because you didn't get a fair chance at an education, because your family couldn't build up economic wealth through real estate, because There is violence in your community because there's not the appropriate kind of policing, because you're afraid of being shot by the police. When you're in a situation like that, and when your life is chaotic, it is hard to advocate for yourself. It is hard to get the resources you need. It's hard to pay attention to your medical problems. It's hard to remember to take your pills. I mean, this is what life is like. It's not, people have a finite amount of personal resource to devote to something, attentional resource. And if you are stuck trying to get the bare bones necessity of food and housing, how can you access healthcare?
Definitely, yes. So now I'm going to, so this was great. Thank you to all the panelists and of course the actors as well. I'm going to invite Derek Goldman to come back and join us and introduce the second section.
Thank you, Bassam, and thanks the panelists. This is a perfect segue into the next set of scenes, which deal broadly with race and power and very much pick up on the conversation that was just happening. But as with the whole play, that distillation really only scratches the surface. Both of these next scenes center around the character of Belize, who is an ex-drag queen and hospital nurse, played here by Justin Weeks. In the first scene, Act 2, Scene 5 of Millennium Approaches, the first play, Belize gives his old friend Pryor a surprise visit in the hospital, offering him a special ointment. And then later, in Perestroika, the second play, Act 1, Scene 6, Belize finds himself treating, of all people, Roy Cohn in the hospital, a power reversal of the most radical and elemental kind. So I'm going to invite Justin and Tom here for that.
Miss Thang.
Marshally be shaped.
Stella.
Stella for star. Let me see. You look like shit. Well, yes, you do, comme la merde.
Merci.
Not to despair, Belle Reeve. Looky. Magic goop.
Oh, what kind of crap is that?
Beats me. Let's rub it on your poor blistered body and see what it does.
This is not Western medicine, this bottle.
Voodoo cream from the botanic around the block.
And you, a registered nurse.
Beeswax and sheep perfume. Cut with Jergens lotion. Full of good vibes and love from some little black Cubana witch in Miami.
Oh, get that trash away from me. I'm immune suppressed.
I am a health professional. I know what I'm doing.
It stinks. Any word from Lewis? Gone.
He'll be back. I know the type. Likes to keep a girl on edge.
It's been...
How long?
I don't remember.
How long have you been here?
I don't remember. I don't give a fuck. I want Lewis. I want my fucking boyfriend. Where the fuck is he? I am dying. I am dying. Where's Lewis? Oh, this is very strange, this drug. Emotional ability for starters.
Save a tab or two for me.
Oh no, not this drug. Ce n'est pas pour la joyeux Noël et la bonne année. This drug. She is serious, poisonous chemistry, ma pauvre bichette. And not just disorienting. I hear things. Voices.
Voices.
A voice.
Saying what?
I'm not supposed to tell.
You better tell the doctor or I will.
Oh, no, no, no. Oh, no, please. I want the voice. It's wonderful. It's all that's keeping me alive. I don't want to talk to some intern about it. You know what happens when I hear it? I get hard.
Oh, my.
Stop. And you know I am slow to rise.
My jaw accept the memory.
And would you deny me this little solace? Betray my concupiscence to Florence Nightingale stormtrooper?
Perish the thoughts, my baby.
Well, they changed the drug just to spoil the fun.
Hey, you and your boner can depend on me.
Oh, je t'adore, ma belle negra.
All this girl talk is politically incorrect, you know. We should have dropped it back when we gave up drag.
I'm sick. I get to be politically incorrect if it makes me feel better. You sound like Lou. Well, at least I have the satisfaction of knowing he's in anguish somewhere. I loved his anguish. Watching him stick his head up his asshole and eat his guts out over some relatively minor moral conundrum. It was the best show in town. But Mother warned me, if they get overwhelmed by the little things,
They'll be belly up, bust fill when something big comes along.
Mother warned me.
And they do come along.
But I didn't listen.
No. Men are beasts.
The absolute lowest.
I have to go. If I want to spend my whole life looking after white people, I can get underpaid to do it.
You're just a Christian martyr.
Whatever happens, baby, I will be here for you.
Je t'aime.
Je t'aime. Don't go crazy on me, girlfriend. I already got enough crazy queens for one lifetime. But for two. I can't be bothering with dementia.
I promise.
Ouch.
Ouch, indeed.
Well, they have to pick on you. I need more, girlfriend. You really do look like shit.
Get out of here, you. I got nothing to say to you.
Just doing
I want a white nurse. It's my constitutional right.
You're in a hospital. You don't have any constitutional rights.
Find the vein, you moron. Don't start jabbing that goddamn spigot in my arm till you find the fucking vein. Or I'll sue you so bad they'll repossess your teeth, you dim black motherfucker.
Watch yourself. You don't talk that way to me when I'm holding something that's sharp. Or I might slip and stick it in your heart. If you have a heart.
Yeah, oh, I do. Puff, little muscle.
I bet. Now, I've been doing drips for a long time. I can slip this in so easy you'll think you were born with it. Or I can make it feel like I just hooked you up to a bag of liquid Drano. So you be nice to me. We're gonna be one sorry asshole come morning.
Nice.
Nice and quiet. There.
Oh. Oh, it hurt.
I'll get you a painkiller.
Want to knock me out?
I sure hope so.
Well, then shut it. Pain is nothing. Pain is life.
Oh, sing it, baby.
Yeah. When they did my facelifts, I made the anesthesiologist use a local. Yeah, they lifted my whole face up like it was a dinner napkin, and I was awake to see it.
Bullshit. No doctor would agree to do that.
Yeah, I can get anybody to do anything I want. Yeah, for instance, let's be friends. Jews and coloreds, historical liberal coalition, right? My people being the first people that to sell retail to your people, and your people being the first people my people could afford to hire to sweep out the store on Saturday morning. And then we all held hands and we rode the bus to Selma. But not me. I don't ride buses. I take cabs. You know, but the thing about the American Negro is he never went communist. Yeah. Loser Jews did. But you people had Jesus, so the Reds never got to you. And I admire that.
Your chart didn't say that you were delusional.
Yeah, barking mad. Sit, talk.
Mr. Cohn, I'd rather suck the pus out of an abscess. I'd rather drink a subway toilet. I'd rather chew off my tongue and spit it in your leathery face. So thanks for the offer of conversation. I'd rather not.
Oh, for Christ's sake. What do I got to do? I got to beg? I don't want to be alone. I fucking hate hospitals. Jeez. Nurses and a waste of time and wasting and weakness. And I want to kill the... Of course, they can't kill this, can they? No. No, it's too simple. It knows itself. Yeah. Harder to kill something if it knows what it is. Like pubic lice. You ever have pubic lice?
That's none of your business.
I got a case of some super crabs from some kid once. It took 20 drenchings of Quell and finally shaving to get rid of the little bastards. I mean, nothing could kill them. And every time I had the itch, I would smile because I learned to respect them, these unkillable crabs, because, well, I learned to identify, you know, determined lowlifes like me. Have you seen a lot of guys with this?
Lots.
How do I look comparatively?
I'd say you're in trouble.
I'm going to die soon. That was a question.
Probably so.
Huh? Well, I appreciate the honesty or whatever. You know, if I live, I could sue you for emotional distress. I could sue the whole hospital, but hey, I'm not prejudiced. I am not a prejudiced man. Those racist guys, simpletons, I never had any use for them. Too rigid. You want to keep your eye on where the most powerful enemy really is. Yeah? I save my head for what counts.
Well, and I think that's a good idea, a good thing to do, probably. This didn't come from me, and I don't like you. But let me tell you a thing or two. They have you down for radiation tomorrow for the sarcoma lesions, and you don't want to let them do that because radiation will kill the T cells and you don't have any you can afford to lose. So tell the doctor, no thanks for the radiation. He won't want to listen. Persuade him or he'll kill you.
You're just a fucking nurse. Why should I listen to you over my very qualified, very expensive WASP doctor?
He's not queer.
Don't wink at me. You said a thing or two, so that's one.
I don't know what strings you pulled to get the azidothymidine trials.
Oh, I have my little ways.
Uh-huh. Watch out for the double blind. They want you to sign something that says they can give you M&Ms instead of the real drug. You'll die, but they'll get the kind of statistics they can publish in the New England Journal of Medicine. And you can't sue because you signed. And if you don't sign, no pills. So if you have any strings left, pull them. Because everyone's put through the ringer with this thing. Time's against you. You can't fuck around with placebos.
You hate me.
Yes.
And so why are you telling me this?
I wish I knew.
You are a Butterfinger spook faggot nurse. I think you have very little reason to want to help me.
Oh, well, consider solidarity. One faggot to another.
Hey, any more of your lip, boy, and you'll be flipping Big Macs in East Hell before tomorrow night. And get me a real phone with a hold button. I mean, look at this. It's just one little line. How am I supposed to perform basic bodily functions on this? Yeah, who is this? Operator. Yeah, give me an outside line. Well, then dial it for me. It's a medical emergency, darling. Dial the fucking number or I'll strangle myself with the phone cord. Yeah, 202-733-8525. Right. Martin Heller. Oh, yeah, hi. Martin, hi. Yeah, I know what time it is. I couldn't sleep. I'm busy dying. Listen, Martin, this drug they got me on, this azithromycin, what do you call it? Yeah, AZT, yeah. Look, I want my own private stash, Martin. A serious, honest aid medicine that I control here in the room with me, no placebos. I'm no good at tests, Martin. I'd rather cheat. So send me my pills with a get well bouquet pronto, or I'll ring up CBS and I'll sing Mike Wallace a little song. The Ballad of Adorable Ollie North and his Secret Contra Slush Fund. Oh, you only think you know all that I know. I don't even know all that I know. Yeah, half the time I just make it up and it still turns out to be true. Yeah, we learned that trick in the 50s. Yeah, so tomorrow, you two-bit scum-sucking shitheel flypaper insignificant dried out little turd, a nice big box of drugs for Uncle Roy, or there will be 7 different kinds of hell to pay.
Reactions, panelists.
I think we were talking about power and access, so that's last scene kind of pointed that out.
Yeah, power and access. And one thing that I think really came through for me in this scene is something that Mark alluded to in our earlier discussion, just this idea of intersectionality, right? I think if we think about vulnerable groups, no matter how they may differ, there's still sort of a heterogeneity within the way that they're composed. So if you're thinking about, people living with disabilities or living in poverty or, racial, ethnic, sexual, gender minorities, there is that common thread in terms of what's related to that identity. And then it's really about when those identities intersect and the almost amplified assault that comes with that. So, from this scene, it's sort of striking to be Black or be a Black queer male or be a Black gay male and sort of the many layers. And I think the actor portraying Belize does a phenomenal job of really conveying the complexities that come with that, and that dynamic. And right towards the end, I can't help but hear that LBJ quote, you know, if you can convince the lowest white man, he's better than the best colored man, right? And even in a role where, despite being part of several minority groups or kind of vulnerable groups and in a position to help, it's still that that differential power dynamic that's based on these layers, whether it's race or class or whatever it may be. So
one of combining this series with the previous ones, and again, thank you to the actors for a phenomenal job. I'm brought back to the early days of HIV in the United States, and also the first time I went to Africa in the year 2000. And the profound sense of helplessness and hopelessness. And it's difficult to describe that. I mean, we can describe the lives and the deaths, but the helplessness and hopelessness is very difficult to describe. But I also feel that at this point, or at some points in this current pandemic, COVID, depending on where you live and who you are and whether or not power structures respond to that. In this epidemic, compare what's happening in the United States, which is appalling, compared to Europe, and how Europe responded compared to the United States, because the people in power, the politicians in power, have abdicated their responsibility to respond to this pandemic in a rational way, unlike politicians in Europe and Asia and other places. If you go back to the early days of HIV in San Francisco, when I was there working with Mark Conant in the late 80s, early 90s, the hopeless, the pall over San Francisco. I mean, people who go to San Francisco now, it's an unrecognizable city. It was one of the most depressing places I'd ever been. As a young gay man, where you should think it would be the best place in the world to be, but it was 3 funerals a week, everyone's friends were dying, and it was affecting the community, not just the gay community, because gay people were accepted and there was more of a broadened, the entire city was depressed. And if you went to Africa, I mean, it's impossible. Take that and magnify it 1,000-fold. Literally 75% of pregnant women in some districts were HIV positive, 75%, they were all going to die. People's homes had multiple graves in front because they bury people in front of their homes. The last 3 generations, villages run entirely by teenagers because every adult had died. And the hopelessness, that was what really grabbed you, the sense that there was nothing we could do. The sense that we are all going to die, which is what gay men felt in the early days of HIV as well. We're all going to die. And in the Africa context, if you're going to die, why would you get an education? Why put your kids through school? Why focus on your kids? Why do anything? That hopelessness. And I actually think one of the greatest gifts of antiretroviral therapy, and really a PEPFAR and what the American people did in Africa, is restoring hope. And I'm lucky to go back to some of those same villages. And that hope, the hope is back, the sense that we can do something. In this country, you know, it was gay men in the communities that looked at that hopelessness and helplessness in the face of power. Just like in Africa, we had drugs for 3, 4, 5 years before anyone even thought about everyone dying in Africa, the destruction of a continent, because powerful people didn't care. There are 2 ways you can look at that. And I think this comes through in how Cone reacts, how different people react. When you feel helpless and hopeless, you can go down different paths. One is to be an angry, mean, power, you know, go to the worst person that you possibly can be, or you can go to a better person and think about others and lift yourself up. And that's what happened in the communities in Africa and in the US with HIV, and happened in the early days of COVID, with COVID in this country as well, as the powerful people didn't respond. A sense of agency of, yes, there's helplessness and hopelessness, but I'm going to do something about it. That led to activism and people engaging and caring for each other. That happened in community after community in this country in COVID, still is. Those first line workers, the community groups that were put together to care for people. The same thing happened in HIV in this country and in Africa. And it's really a beautiful thing that community caring hope can actually come out of that hopelessness, especially when people in power refuse to take their responsibility. We can take it on for ourselves. And I think that came through in these scenes and reminds me of the previous scenes as well. The last thing I would say, which I think we should keep in mind ourselves focused on in this pandemic, and thank God some of the political appointees in the FDA and CDC are not caving, but we made some big mistakes because of that agency and sense of doing something. I have to do something. We now know AZT was a mistake. It did far more harm than good, but we did it because we felt like we had to do something. And we had that sense that we were doing something, but it did a lot more harm than good. It's a good reminder to be cautious as we're trying to push products through at this moment to make sure that we don't look back in 10 years and say, did we do more harm than good?
We sort of already did that with hydroxychloroquine, didn't we, though?
Well, and bleach and lots of other
amongst other things. Yeah, the other thing that strikes me, and I think Mark's comments really hit home about going two different directions, is, you know, going to a dark place and going to a better place. I mean, I don't know if people remember, but back in the 80s with HIV, people were really, it was a really stigmatizing disease. You may not have done anything else, but if you had HIV, you were ostracized. And people were being thrown out of their families. There was no sort of insurance for people. They were losing their insurance. They were losing their jobs. They were losing their homes. And if you wanted to get medical care, you had to basically divest yourself of all your property to get on Medicaid, to get any sort of decent health care, because other insurances wouldn't cover you. And people weren't even being buried. People wouldn't put them in a cemetery. There are thousands of people buried in Potter's Field on Hart Island off of Manhattan in unmarked graves who died because nobody would claim their bodies. In Arkansas and Hot Springs, Ruth Coker Burke was a one-woman sort of engine to try to help these people. She used her own cemetery to bury people in, because she would call people's families who were dying, this woman. She would call them up and try to get them to take their loved one home, to take care of them, to accept them, to, you know, pay for their funerals. And they wouldn't. They told her no. There are hundreds of people buried in her cemetery because those people were discarded by their families because of the stigma of being gay, because of the stigma of HIV. And so when I think about COVID now, I think divide is not quite as great, but I also think about early on in the disease, as it's going on, people saying, well, it's a Chinese virus, right? And then later on, oh, it's a virus that's going to affect the cities like New York and San Francisco and Seattle. It's not going to help affect the people in, in rural areas, right? That's a really dark thing to say about a medical issue. I don't care because I'm not at risk. I don't care. The flip side of that is all those people who did come from those places that weren't hit in the beginning to try to help out when COVID was hitting New York. And I think, you see the good and the bad, the people who step up. I wonder also if this pandemic is also going to become an instrument of change, because AIDS changed the way we approach medicine very fundamentally. ACT UP changed the way people thought about patients advocating for healthcare for themselves, saying we have a right to have agency. We have a right to say how these systems of care are created. We have a right to say what the priorities are in terms of treatment and medication and big pharma. And it changed how the drug approval process, it changed, the Red Ribbon, all these other medical organizations that are devoted to different specific diseases. It changes how we think about disease advocacy and our relationship to the patient, right? Because how we think about, as medical providers, how do we relate to patients and how do we respect that sort of agency and what we do? I wonder if COVID will have a similar effect.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. really, really informative commentary. And I just sort of, towards the end, I just wanted to pick up on what Delia said about intersectionality, right? Especially because in this moment, we're not just viewing this play in the time of COVID. We're also viewing this play in the time of Black Lives Matter, right? And the limits of the limits of solidarity among different communities. And I think that the interaction between Roy Cohn and Belize in this scene really brings that into stark relief, right? So yes, thank you so much to the panelists and the actors. I believe it is now time for us to switch to the third section. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. Yeah, and just to do a time check for all of you watching, this event is scheduled till 6:45, and we're very much on schedule. So what we're doing now is a montage, some brief moments from the later part of the play that highlight thematically how each of these characters is understanding and experiencing America and the idea of America. First, a short monologue from Roy, and then a short conversation between Lewis and Belize, and then Prior reflecting on his journey and all of ours towards the end of the play. So this will be a few minutes of shorter sequences. Then we're gonna bring everybody back, the actors as well as the panelists, for a little more discussion and crosstalk about the resonances. All of these actors have deep histories with this play and this material, so we want to hear from them about that. And then we hope you can stay, because at the very end there's one final dramatic scene or moment, and we'll end, as I say, at 6:45. So next we're moving to this monologue from Mitchell Hebert as Roy Cohn.
You know the worst thing about being sick in America, Ethel? Is you're booted out of the parade. Americans have no use for sick. Look at Reagan. He's so healthy, he's hardly human. He's 100 if he's a day. He takes a slug in the chest, and 2 days later, he's out west riding ponies in his PJs. I mean, who does that? Ah, that's America. It's just no country for the infirm.
Just so the record's straight, I love Prior, but I was never in love with him. I have a man uptown, and I have since long before I first laid my eyes on the sorry-ass side of you.
I didn't know that,
no,
that you...
because you never bothered to ask. Up in the air, just like that angel. Too far off the earth to pick out the details. Lewis and his big ideas. Big ideas are all you love. America is what Lewis loves.
So what? Maybe I do. You don't know what I love. You don't.
Well, I hate America, Lewis. I hate this country. It's just big ideas and stories and people dying and people like you. The white cracker who wrote the national anthem knew what he was doing. He set the word free to a note so high nobody could reach it. It's deliberate. You come with me to room 1013 over at the hospital. I'll show you America. Terminal and crazy. And mean. I live in America, Lewis. That's hard enough. I don't have to love it. You do that. Everybody's got to love something.
Everybody does.
But still, bless me anyway. I want more life. I can't help myself, I do. I have lived through such terrible times, and there are people who live through much, much worse, but you see them living anyway, when they are more spirit than body, more sores than skin, when they're burned and in agony, when flies lay eggs in the corners of the eyes of their children, still they live. Death usually has to take life away. I don't know if that's animal. I don't know if it's not braver to die, but I recognize the habit, the addiction to being alive. We live past hope. If I can find hope anywhere, that's it. That's the best I can do. It is so much not enough. It is so inadequate, but bless me anyway. I want more life. You haven't seen what's to come. You have only seen what you're afraid is coming. Until it arrives, please don't be offended, but all you can see is fear. I am leaving heaven to you now. I will take my illness with me, and I will take my death with me too. The earth is my home, and I want to go home.
Are we all here?
Yes.
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 That was phenomenal. Thank you so much to the actors. That was so poignant to listen to and to watch. And so for this final sort of discussion round, I invite all of you to think about the relationship between disability and illness on the one hand, and citizenship, and what it means to be an American, right? And especially like how this play is sort of reflecting on themes such as nationality, national borders, and what it says as about, you know, when Roy Cohn says this is not a country for the infirm, right? And the way that he sort of idolizes the fitness of Ronald Reagan, right? So is this country habitable for people who are sick, especially right now that it's possible that the Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act might be revoked, especially also at the time when this was first performed. It was a year after the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, right? So there's this interesting confluence of these issues of biocitizenship and disability and belonging. So I'd invite you all to talk a little bit about that.
I don't know if Mark agrees, but our healthcare system is crazy. So, no, it's not a country for the ill, because if you are ill or you have a disability, it is so hard to access coherent healthcare. I mean, physicians deal with it on a day-to-day basis, trying to figure out what the hell they're supposed to do and how to get care for their patients and how to access them. You know, we had to create a whole separate system. That's the Ryan White system, the program that we have. It's because people who get sick and really need help and need expensive medications, the medications will basically let them lead a normal, productive life. You know, we have to employ treatment navigators, social workers, nurse practitioners, people who do home visits to actually get them access to the care that they need. Very basic levels of care. You can't just do it alone. So there's this whole system around this one disease to do that. And we have to build it, right? And if we want to talk about power, right? It's in the name. The Ryan White Care Act is named after a heterosexual, virgin, white boy, okay? And that's not an accident. Millions of people were dying. Millions of people of color, millions of gay people, okay? But you know what? A straight white boy had to die. for the country to give a damn.
Yes.
Um,
I would invite also the actors, and what I presented was just a prompt, and you can of course, you know, sort of talk about what the play means to you as well, and so it's pretty open-ended. So please feel free.
I'll speak very quickly. Hi, y'all. Thank y'all for having us. I live at the intersection of queer, Black, male, and I also live with HIV. I'm living with the virus. And like in a word, in short, no. This isn't a country for the infirm. And finally, when I jumped through all the hoops to get the proper medication I need, I'm very privileged to have my life-sustaining medication. But there's still personal drawbacks and walls that I come across all the time. Black people don't have a good experience with medical with the medical system in this country. Experiments. It makes it very hard to live even when I have the medication that I have. How I'm conditioned, how I'm socialized in the society, what I've been taught to think of myself, what I'm what is fed to me surrounding my Blackness, my HIV positiveness, my queerness. It gets hard to get past the stigma even of virus. It's been very interesting in this pandemic to watch the kind of universal getting behind of trying to squash the number of deaths. We had this huge layout on I can't remember what publication it was. I believe it was the New Yorker. Once we passed 200,000 deaths, and I think in '89 it was a blurb that you had to search for in the New Yorker to find anything about the 200,000 people who were dead from the AIDS epidemic. So even when we have the access to healthcare that we need, we have to change the conversation around virus and the stigma that it holds so that people can live lives, can just live. That's all I'll say. Thank
you. Justin, I mean, I think it's so brave to talk about like HIV, which I think is kind of crazy to say that. Having, you know, so many years and knowing so many people who are positive, but I think in our profession, there are so many positive people I know and have dated, and they don't talk about it. So anyway, I just, you know, I love you. I was so struck by something that happened, something I heard that Roy Cohn says about Ronald Reagan riding the horse. And it is Trump. It is Trump getting the special drugs. Maybe that helped him, or maybe it didn't, or maybe it was the sheer will of that ego, and proving that he was healthy and saying, "Look at me." And yeah, I thought that was something that when I did this play, I never really heard, or I heard it, but it didn't register in the same way. And I just wanted to talk about that. You know, this play is, I grew up with this play and with HIV as a kind of like, I don't know, kind of a shadow over my whole life and my sexuality. And this and I have watched, you know, I was in graduate school when the cocktail came out, and I saw people who would have been dead live. Um, but there's something about this whole pandemic currently that I mean, it's all like I know we're all stressed out and we're all living a kind of trauma, but I have like that trauma and this trauma kind of simultaneously running. And revisiting this play kind of just reminded me of that. And so much has changed and so much is the same. And I do think that this is a work of art that will live through this and will continue to be relevant because these issues are sadly still with us. Anyway, I'm just glad to be here and to be with these people. Thank you. Scene.
I'd also like to thank Justin for talking about being HIV positive. It's not an easy thing, which is astounding.
Yeah.
Difficult to do even now. And for your how eloquently you spoke about the inequalities, because I think the question, are we a country that's where it's not good to be sick, is dichotomous. And that's true when you take it globally even more so. If you're wealthy, you're white, you get pretty good healthcare. You get great healthcare actually in the United States. If you're anything but those, you don't. At all. We have one of the worst healthcare systems in the world, as far as I'm concerned, because we don't care for people the way we're supposed to. But even if you go around the world, it gets worse, or even worse. Even in Europe, you know, some of the systems that we have, we don't put enough emphasis on health. And so really, whether or not you have access to healthcare, whether or not it's good to be sick, really depends on who you are, sadly. And Roy Cohn shows that very persuasively in The Power, where he calls someone up and gets a drug that no one else can get, which is happening today with COVID. People are doing the same thing who have power and have access. I also think the second point's as important, and something that distresses me greatly about the medical profession, our incredible fear of death, and not wanting to be around people who are dying. You know, when someone's dying in a hospital, you will not see a doctor around for the 2 to 3 days before they die. They disappear. It's a failure if someone dies, you didn't do your job. That's not the way it always was. 30, 40 years ago, that's not a serious part of the health profession, was being with people, accompanying them as they were dying. And I had the privilege of doing this in the San Francisco in the early 90s with 15, 16-year-olds, none of their friends, no one would be near them, no one would come see them, they were dying alone. You know, there is something about our culture, and it's where this isn't the case in places like Africa, where death is part of life. And how do we do that better? How do we accompany people? How do we welcome and understand life is there? And you know, I was listening to something about Martin Luther King, his lawyer, actually talking about some of the same issues we're talking about recently. And they were all talking just before one of the marches, and he would always joke about that any of them could die. And he was like, look, any of us can die anytime, anywhere. We have no idea how. The Bible tells us this. It's not whether or not we live or die. We're all going to die, and we have no control over it. It's what we do while we live. Who do we serve? How do we be better people? How do we create a better world? And a little bit like when you have power and where you feel hopeless and helpless, you can go either way. When you're faced with death, you can go in different ways too. And death is there. And I think the medical profession has abdicated its responsibility on really welcoming, accepting, and helping people die. And I think the arts have a tremendous opportunity to teach us lessons in this way too. And the two coming together might be able to change things.
Our system isn't really designed to help people in that passage. You know, we have these hospice systems and palliative care, but they're not really in effect in force. These are sort of embryonic fields, and physicians it's all about money now and time. And so spending that time that's very valuable at the bedside with somebody who is frightened and dying, that is something that physicians don't have a lot of time to do left anymore, you know, because there's productivity and everything. So, and I think about that a lot because with this current pandemic, how many people I've seen who were dying and who needed time and dying alone because nobody else could visit them in the hospital, and they were in a room and everybody was all bagged up, and the person who, the people, God bless nurses, they're the ones who are there at the bedside really looking at after these people day to day and really providing them comfort. But it's so hard when you're at the bedside and, you know, somebody's getting worse and they ask you, you know, like, you know, they're on that oxygen, they're probably on the way to being intubated, and they're asking you, you know, how does it look? And you're trying to be, you know, hopeful, but also be honest, and just sort of like, just all you can do is really hold their hand. And, but, you know, they look in your eyes and, you know, and they know, because, you know, they can see the look in your eyes that this is not going well. And you try to put things in sort of the nicest way that you can and the gentlest way you can. But, you know, and you know that they know. And so you're just sitting there looking at each other, you know, eye to eye, and just there are these moments you just can't forget, you know.
I would say, you know, to Leon's point and then Mark's point, we certainly see it in death, we see it in birth, and sort of to go back to Bassam's original point, this is not a country for the infirmed. You know, I think I'd certainly be out of a job if it was. You know, we have so much research and literature that shows, you know, the layers of intervention that we have to build in and design and redesign and constantly innovate in order to ensure that everyone can have just a chance, not even to access, but to have a chance at accessing the care they need, you know, at any point along the spectrum. And just the types of resources and the intensive ways that we need to adjust the experience for patients, especially patients from marginalized groups, to ensure, again, that they just have a chance at accessing the care they need. If you think about it from the provider perspective, even, you know, thinking through the intense training or reimagining how they interact with their patients. The fact that we have to think how providers interact with patients at a baseline if they don't look like them or have a different lived experience to them. The fact that, you know, now implicit bias training is something everyone has to go to. So clearly, you know, it's not designed, even from the way we train our providers to the way that we actually do deliver care for our patients. And so when we look at the HIV epidemic, when we look at COVID-19 now, and any other scourge, you really see the healthcare system, you know, quite frankly, to me, is actually functioning precisely as it was intended, right? Which was not for those who really need the care.
Right, there's no curriculum. People only learn things that are on the test. And there is no curriculum, there's no requirement to learn about cultural competency, about the social determinants of health based on race, about LGBTQIA care on any test in medicine. And so people don't learn.
So we just have less than a minute before we go into the final speech. So I'd like to just thank all the panelists, the actors, and people, the audience as well, for tuning in. This was really, really informative and generative.
Sure was. I'm really floored and moved by the conversation and the art, and just want to, Lakshmi, thank you for partnering to help think this through, and thank every one of you, all of the performers and the panelists, and the sort of weaving of the last hour and 45 minutes. And, you know, it's a time, you know, what echoes in my mind is this idea of we live past hope, even in that last conversation, as we sit here a week a week out, and where we are in October. And so anyway, just very, very grateful to you all. I want to thank all of the partners. We had an amazing group of partners who were named at the beginning, who were part of putting this together. And also a thank you to Toby Clark, who was the sort of unseen face behind making this go smoothly and technically, which actually was a bit of a feat. We had to figure this out and how to make it artful. So thank you to Toby. So we're gonna, all of us except for the beautiful Tom Story are gonna turn our cameras off, and we're gonna send you off with Pryor's final invocation before the angel statue at the Bethesda Fountain in Central Park. Thank you all, and be well, and have a good evening.
I'm almost done. The fountain's not flowing now. They turn it off in the winter. Ice in the pipes. But in the summer, it is a sight to see. I want to be around to see it. I plan to be. I hope to be. This disease will be the end of many of us, but not nearly all. And the dead will be commemorated and will struggle on with the living, and we are not going away. We will not die secret deaths anymore. The world only spins forward. We will be citizens. The time has come. Bye now. You are fabulous creatures, each and every one, and I bless you. More life. The great work begins.